Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 90. Today's subject, our favorite fantasy fiction and why they work.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Our favorite co-host, our only co-host.
I'm the best and the worst at the same time.
Yeah, but I didn't want to bring that up.
Well, you know, I thought you were thinking it, which is why I brought it up. So if I say it, it's empowerment, disempowerment. So...
Well, I do try to do both at the same time.
So I love that we've got the triple F here. We've got our favorite fantasy fiction.
This episode will fail on 3 levels. Excellent.
Failing favorite fantasy fiction. Okay, so you chose this subject as...
Essentially, it's one of the things I think you always get worried about when you create fiction for people is, will people like it? And so it's just one to talk about things that we love that have helped inspire me, helped inspired you, and why we think they work.
And it's funny because I pointed it out before, but again, if you listen to the interview episodes, what each one of those writers says is what stopped them from creating their fiction and getting it out there, getting the ball rolling, was they were worried about what people would like.
Yeah.
They're worried that people wouldn't like what they thought of.
Yeah.
And believe me, someone's going to like it. What you have to share is worth sharing, so please share it. Create it, make it, share it.
And I want to. we were talking to the producer earlier, and one of our friends from online is actually. And I don't want to say specifically what her business is at this point. She will be on the show, not interview, because there's crossover with what we do. Who's actually going to try and do her own thing. And one of her fears is, does she have an audience? And her thing was so out there, and there is crossover.
Her fiction is so out there.
Yeah, what she's doing is so out there.
It's unique.
It's unique, and the way she wants to sell it is what I thought just wouldn't work. And as soon as I start shaking my head no, then my wife tells me she already has a big client. I'm like, okay, it just proved that. There is an audience for what you want to do.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. We actually discussed that in the beginning of the show. Before we started recording, Jeff and I had a conversation about this very subject. And I know we're talking about it very vaguely, but you're right. It is a very unique fictional idea with a practical application that is very original. I've never heard anything like it before.
Yeah, and when she's ready to go, there will be an interview for her on the show, and you can learn more about it. But I don't want to give it away since she hasn't officially started.
Do you at least want to say her name so when she's on the show they know who to look for?
Becky Caldwell.
Okay. So,
best fantasy fiction, or favorite
fantasy fiction, and more importantly, why they work.
Yeah.
Like, why did they stick out for us?
I think what we'll just do is we'll sort of bounce back and forth.
Okay. So, hey, do you want to start it up?
I have to start off with Excalibur.
I have to disqualify that right out of hand because it's not fiction.
Okay. All right.
Some moistened bint, even a scimitar.
Yes. Okay. So really, you're going to make this argument?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to ignore you now. And
it's not, Excalibur's not real?
No.
Then how did England come to be? Hello?
I think it had more to do with the Anglo-Saxons and then the Normans invading them in a series of historical events.
You know that I only have one thing to say about all of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, there's some truth to it because the mythology is worked in. If you look at the long line of lineage of all the English kings, King Arthur is listed as the first.
There was actually a King Arthur?
No.
Or they use him, they acknowledge.
I think it was almost a way to tie them back to Rome. And so the legitimacy of the Roman emperors after they fell, unifying England.
Allow me to ask a more specific question. When did the name King Arthur get put in the line? I mean, did they just do it in the past few hundred years, or was it?
No, I think this is from way back. I think,
before the book was written.
Oh yes.
Okay.
You know, I think it was put in probably like when they first unified what they called the Kingdom of England, and it was this extension back to this prior king that helped show legitimacy in that this was actually one land.
So there was an Arthur.
No.
They made up an Arthur.
Yes.
Prior to the first fictional King Arthur.
There probably is a historical character that he's based off of. Roman, who essentially, after the legions pulled out, was involved in some wars to help bring peace for a while in part of the area. But he did not rule all of England. He was not a king. He was a general fighting the wars that were there after the Romans pulled out of England.
The first story of Excalibur, was it Once and Future King? Was that the first Excalibur?
The first Excalibur book, I believe, is from 16th century France.
Huh.
Le Morte d'Arthur or something like that.
Not familiar with that. I'm just familiar with Once and Future King.
It's one of those where it's sort of, and it was actually courtly like stories that would be told in court. I think before that, they show up in the courts of France and England. Before that, these stories of King Arthur. They've been around since the time that this first king appeared, and they keep going on, and they change a little bit each time. A lot of the characters are the same. Obviously, Arthur himself is in all of them. Some of the characters change, some of their motivations change, but I mean, this is a epically long mythology.
Well, on your list here, you have Excalibur.
And I'm talking about the movie.
Well, that's what I was just about to clarify. I'm assuming you're referring to the movie mid-70s, I think?
Mid or late. I remember being a kid, and when I found this was on, I have to watch this, and my dad would always be like, yes, but you have to wait for 15 minutes. And I never knew why. And at the very beginning,
is there a sex scene in the beginning?
There's a very graphic sex scene at the beginning.
I know there's sex scenes in the movie. I just couldn't remember when and where. It's been a long time since I've watched it.
There's one later on, but it's not very graphic. But there's a very graphic.
See, that's the one that I'm thinking
where
of.
Uther.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And so my dad would
the conception of Arthur.
The conception of Arthur. I would not be allowed to watch till after that because and like
there's a commercial, Jeffrey. You're not missing anything.
But it's on the movie channel, Dad.
It says it starts at 5. It's 5 now, Dad. It's not on yet.
And it was funny because it took me years to figure it out because he would never let me watch it. Because like as in most American families, the graphic violence of the movie is okay.
Yeah, that's fine watching guys get impaled. Yes. It's the women getting impaled.
But in theory, too, you could argue that's a rape scene because...
It was a rape scene.
Because really he changes his form to look like her husband to have sex with her.
Yeah.
It wasn't a forced rape scene. It was a trick rape scene.
It was a trick rape scene. Yeah. Nonetheless, rape.
Yeah.
She was...
most definitely.
She was getting sexed up by someone she didn't want to get sexed up by.
Yeah, or if she did, at the time that it happened... She did not know who it was, so she could not have consented.
We are kind of spoiling. Should we say spoilers? Just to clarify, this entire episode is probably going to be spoilerific.
There will be a lot of spoilers in this episode. I don't know if that one specifically is.
I mean,
that's not really...
Generally, when we get into talking about and suggesting fiction, I try very hard to maintain a level of spoiler-free integrity. But the nature of this episode doesn't lend to that because we're going to be talking about our favorite fictions and why they're our favorite fictions. So we have to get specific.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a lot of spoilers in here, guys.
And I have to say the biggest thing that worked for me was one timing. It was a well-made fantasy movie, which there aren't a lot of.
It's a well-acted movie.
That's what I'm saying on all levels.
Like that movie still holds up surprisingly well.
You can watch it today and one, it's not a science fiction, so like the graphics, you don't need graphics.
Yeah, period pieces, they work well
when the magic was performed, it was convincing, and like I said, it still holds up.
One of the things that I liked about Excalibur so much, because that's also we did our lists at different times, and we clearly, looking at your list and looking at mine, we clearly went about it from a totally different perspective.
Yes, and two of those could very easily be on mine on your list.
Definitely. Let me guess. Well, actually, I'm going to go with 3 or 4. I like this one, that one, and maybe this. So there's like 4 or 5 there that could totally be there. But Excalibur should definitely be on mine. I love that movie. Yeah. I own Excalibur. I love Excalibur. Mm-hmm. One of the parts in that movie that really rings out for me is there's a battle sequence early in the movie before Arthur is king. He's not even a knight yet. I think he was still a squire. Mm-hmm. And I think he already had Excalibur. Because, he already had Excalibur because a guy was like, you don't deserve this. You're not even a knight yet. And
he hands it over?
He hands Excalibur to another man.
Patrick Stewart.
Is that who?
That's who it was. Yeah.
I knew he was in the movie, but I didn't remember who was in that sequence.
I believe it was him, yeah.
He hands the sword to him and says, knight me then. On the middle of a battlefield that is still occurring. The battle is still occurring. He drops to his knees in like a small moat in a river. He's in water. And you can see the guy he hands the sword to is considering on cutting him down.
And people are encouraging him.
And people are encouraging him to do so because they're like, look, he doesn't deserve how does he deserve it any more than any else of us? That's like, right. Why shouldn't we be king?
Most of us were real nobles. He's a squire.
Right. Yeah. But the fact that he is so earnest and so brave and so willing to put himself in that circumstance, he can't deny that this man has greatness in him.
And if you notice, when he initially pulls up to swing, the sword music played, which indicates that the sword itself was like, no. Mm-hmm. And the sword actually helped convince him because of his earnestness and it being the rightful king.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm wrong. Patrick Stewart was the father of Guinevere. His castle was being sieged. It was one of the people sieging his castle, and it might have been, a great Irish actor who's in everything today.
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, I believe, might have been. He was in there too, but
I'm not sure that's who it was. You said great Irish actor, and that's immediately what comes to mind.
Yeah. I know he was in there, and it might not have been his character, but it was one of the people sieging Patrick Stewart's castle.
Yeah,
I mean the cast is
great movie,
unbelievable.
Yeah, incredible cast.
So it was a great non-fiction. I read Lord of the Rings at this point.
Great non-fiction?
Yes, as we were saying earlier about magic.
Oh, yes, because Excalibur is real.
So a non-fiction fantasy. And but one well worth watching. The way they do magic is convincing. It's believable.
I don't even remember how magic occurs in the movie. It's just like mild special effects. A lot of smoke.
Yeah, well, because it's the first one with the Guinevere thing was he couldn't get to her because there's a chasm.
Yeah.
So he calls upon the dragon is this thing that they're calling upon. And so there's the line, the words that you use.
Clatu Virata Nikto. Are you impressed that I know that at the drop of a hat?
But you know that from a different movie.
Name the 3 movies that use that line. 3.
I know 2.
Okay, what are the 2?
Army of Darkness.
There you go.
Excalibur.
And probably the first movie to use it, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Really? Klaatu is the name of the guy who steps off the alien ship.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, and that's probably how they came up with it for Excalibur.
I believe I believe it's the first thing that he says. Again, I haven't seen that movie in a long time either. I'm pretty sure he says Klaatu Virata Nikto. Oh. That's where it comes from.
Okay, that's very cool. It's always learn something like that from Mike.
Lots of useless fictional knowledge from me.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to movies and scripts, Mike's a great guy to talk to because he loves... Who?
Michael,
yeah. Or him, whatever.
Yeah, either one of us.
Yeah, either one of... He's actually a little crazy, so it depends what mood he's in. But I'd say that's one of my favorites because the magic was subtle, and it was about chanting, so there's like this line that summons the power to do the effect desired. And there wasn't a lot of magic in it, but when it was used...
It was used to good effect.
Yeah.
I think they designed it wisely.
Yeah.
Now, the second one on your list...
Actually, go to the top.
You want to go to the top of mine?
Yeah, we'll just alternate back and forth.
Now, I have to admit, when I started making my list, I didn't have a lot of preparation time, so I kind of had to think about this on the fly in a few minutes before the show. And really what I thought about is what fantasies have a strong bedrock, a strong foundation for all the things that they have going. So this isn't necessarily one of the ones that is my favorite. There are pieces of it that I love. Yeah. So I wrote down Zelda.
I do want to caveat too. Whenever you ask someone the question, what is your favorite? And then fill in the blank, whatever that is. Especially if there are people who really like the area. The list could change if you ask me this tomorrow.
Yeah,
because it's what was the mood I was in when I wrote it down.
Yeah, because you're constantly discovering new things,
and even that though, it's like your mood might change, or you were thinking of something else that you love because there's just so much.
You forgot something. Like I know my list is incomplete, but I wrote Zelda. There's so many games in the Zelda universe. There are ones that contradict others, so we're not going to get into the continuity of the storyline. But just the fact that it is such an engrossing fantasy world is what I love about it. Like, I know that if I play a new Zelda game, that it's going to feel a certain way. It's going to have an environment that's going to feel familiar, even if it's a completely new Zelda game. Which is ironic considering how many generations of systems the game has been on. You play the original Zelda, you play one of the newer Zeldas, there's still a congruency to them that you wouldn't expect, because you play like the very first Metal Gear and then you play like the newer Metal Gear and they're barely relatable.
Okay.
I mean, there's still an aspect of that. Do you know how Metal Gear became a stealth game? It's because on the original Nintendo, they didn't have the technology. They didn't have the RAM, I think was the limitation, was the memory, to be able to put a whole bunch of soldiers on the screen at the same time.
So was this to make it convincing of why there's so few people?
They used the excuse that the technology was limited, and they worked it into the story as in it's a stealth game.
That's clever.
So now the newer games, they're just stayed that way. With Zelda, you play the original game. It's amazing how much gets fit into that game that has a feel. When you go through that game, you realize there's almost no dialogue throughout the entirety of the game. There's very few words. Like there's maybe a paragraph or two, but you still get a sense of story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even though it's almost wordless storytelling.
I go far as saying, and I could be wrong, that is the first really big hitter fantasy game.
I think I could agree with that.
I mean, I've played some from before the time.
We're not going to argue timelines. So, guys, if you're listening to this and you're going, no, this other game was first.
There could be some around the time, but I think this was the first great fantasy game. And I played some that are older, definitely, like Rogue, which was an old ASCII-based graphic game.
Well, you could go Zork.
Yeah, but they weren't great. And I'm sorry. And you might have loved, for me.
I love Zork.
You might have, but this was the first one that really felt like a game. Where like Rogue, you use the arrow keys and move around and you'd step on things and you kind of felt like you were in a dungeon. And I played it probably for way too many hours, I'm sure. But Zelda was the first thing that sort of brought all together in this sort of modern idea of what a game is. Like Zork was not a graphics-based game at all.
No.
It was a story game, which is fine too and great for fiction. But the modern idea of a video game and Zork, they just don't.
I think the real thing that I want to put across about Zelda is not so much as the story, so much as it is the there's a word that I'm looking for, not environment, but like the feel. Do you know what I'm trying to say? There's a word that I'm brain farting on right now. Just the personality of the game, the environment.
Je ne sais quoi.
Je ne sais quoi. Sure, that's perfect. Since I quite literally can't remember the word I'm thinking of. I'm very interested to get to your second choice here, though, because I'm not familiar with that. I don't think I know what that is.
Okay, The Baker's Boy is a book from J.V. Jones.
Fair enough. I haven't read it.
And I don't think this was ever a big book. And the biggest thing that really impacted me. There were good characters in the book. It was a good story. It was a little bit more adult than some of the other fantasy books I read, but it's not like reading, it's not like essentially a porn fantasy book or,
Okay, so there is like adult themes in it.
There's adult themes, and they broach subjects that aren't quite broached in other fantasy that I've read, a little bit more adult things.
Is this maybe because of the time period that you read it in? Like you happen to get a book that's a little more mature?
I just think it was the way she wrote it. Yeah, it was probably my age.
Yeah.
Because this was probably after I was starting to get out of the Dragonlance, the D&D fantasy stuff, and I was looking for more, and it gave me a little bit more. But the biggest thing I remember was the way she performed magic in the book. And I remember, I think to this day, was if someone was casting magic on you, you would start to get a coppery taste in the back of the mouth.
Now, did magic generally have a proximity? So, like,
it was if it was being done to you.
Well, right, but my point is, like, could somebody be halfway across the planet doing it, and you would know it's being done because of that taste, or was it just like a precursor warning to something that was occurring in your immediate vicinity?
Yes, or it was something happening to you. Mm-hmm. And I'm not so sure about the ranges. I don't remember that specifically, but magic was invasive when it was done to people, and she really did a good job conveying that, where it's not like, oh, I'm going to cast a hero spell on you. You know, I mean, magic was in the world, but when it was done to you,
it was an invasion of you.
Yeah, you felt cheapened by it. It was almost a rape analogy. I mean, not as extreme.
I was actually going to encourage you to avoid using that word to this reference and say it was a violation.
Yeah, but I mean, really, she made it pretty intense. Where I mean, you could feel like their fingers pressing into you, and I mean, the way she did it, it really took magic to a different level.
How old were you when you read it?
High school.
Roughly.
Age.
Okay, so if it's 15, 16, would that be fair?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah. And so it was good in that sense, where it really, it was the first time I saw magic really used in a novel form that took it beyond a simple, I'm going to
fireball
the spell and fireball you. Yeah. And there are other neat things too, where like one of the bad guys, I believe, was trying to find where the baker's boy is, who's obviously you can tell the good guy because it's like, you know, the baker's boy, it's not like the knight, because he could or might not be good. But if it's a baker's boy, or like some young kid from the village, they're the good guy. And yeah, so
he's the unrealized potential.
The unrealized potential, and the thing the 15 or 16-year-old kid is rooting to be. I want to be the hero of the 15 or 16.
Well, I mean, I think that's the root of a good fictional tale, when you see yourself as the hero. Like you want to be the lead character. Yeah, you want to be exactly.
Yeah. And that's why that kind of fiction I think does really well. But there was another one where, so he's using birds, and birds go way back. Tolkien used birds, you know,
as
birds
a messenger
to spy.
And
so he's using the birds to go out and do it. But the limitation was he had to maintain a connection with it. So if I remember correctly, he would magically remove the heart and swallow it.
So kind of, well, I mean, the ritual part isn't it, but what you're saying reminds me of more modern Game of Thrones, the wargs.
Yes.
Okay, so keep going. They remove the heart and swallow it.
And he had control, and the bird would do his bidding until it disintegrated in his stomach. And I forget, they had a time frame. I don't know if it was realistic or not, but whenever the heart would go bad, he would need another bird. He would eat the heart, and he could then use that bird to control it. So it was the way magic was used in there was very inventive. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Baker's Boy's not something I was familiar with. I was very interested to see that on your list. The thing is, you saying that really makes me think of one of my favorites is on my list, but I don't want to get to it yet.
Well, hold on.
I want to save that one.
Because you want to go to number 2 on your list, I'm assuming.
Well, see,
or do you want to skip that one? You can skip it.
I think I want to skip that one. Okay. I think I want to go to something that's got a little more strength to it, because although
to me, the last part of that ruined the whole series.
All right, so we'll just at least footnote it. We're talking about Record of Lodoss War, and it's been so long since I've seen it, I don't remember what you're talking about.
So essentially, you have the story. It's essentially an adventuring party, we'll say.
Yeah, and again, the unrealized potential. You have the young fledgling hero,
and then
who should have been killed in the very first fight he got into, but we'll skip
that part. I mean, yeah, it's fiction.
Yeah, it's fiction. Yeah,
and so, but it's that they go through. There's a lot of great character development, which a lot of times stories miss, especially that's anime. And anime in general usually has very little character development where the characters are really being affected. And that's not true, because good anime does do it.
I was about to say, there are some...
Usually more adult targeted anime does do that, but this was not that kind. This was more targeted for probably
a younger audience.
And at the very end, the last episode after it all plays out, all the characters are there, and they're interacting exactly like it would have at the beginning, and I hated that.
No growth.
It's like, well, subtract out all the growth now that the adventure's done, and I'm just like, no. You just ruined it.
Is it possible that they did that with the intention on there'll be more, so they kind of created it to be an episodic, like self-contained?
But once again, why would they have lost their growth?
I don't know.
It ruined it for me.
New adventure. I need to add experience. It's like when you beat a game and there's a sequel and they take away all your growth in the sequel and you have to learn it all over again.
Yeah, but it's not like if I rewatch the series and at the beginning they have 0 growth again, I'm fine with it. But at the end of the game, before you restart it, I have a problem with it. But that's me personally.
Fair enough. Well, look, it's a valid.
I love character development.
It's a valid. I love character development too. Cool. And personally, I mean, for a record of Lodos Wars, as far as anime fantasy goes, definitely too few tentacles in that one. I'm not. That's the only real big problem I have about it.
A lot of tentacles, we'll say.
Yeah, skip record of Lodos.
Skip it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of tentacles there. But let's go to something that's got a little more meat to it. I think I really want to go here, but you kind of wanted to save that one too, actually. You wanted to save that one towards the end, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we
That's our bonus one.
Why don't we hit the elephant in the room and go with Lord of the Rings then? Okay. And for the purposes of the discussion, I want to talk about the movies because the books are great, and we've mentioned this before. We're not going to knock Tolkien, but they are a big. They're tough to read.
Yeah.
You know, they're a big nut swallow.
It's the story structure is tough. And here's
the language is tough.
The language is tough too, even though ironically it was written for a 5th grader.
It shows, a 5th grader at that time period was much more educated than 5th graders of the modern
obviously.
Day. Yeah.
But story-wise, it would be the first half of the book would be about Frodo and Sam, and the second half of the book would be about everyone else. And you didn't have a lot of the dramatic tensions that you could actually make for the movies.
We said we were going to talk about the movies.
But I wanted to
I know, but now you're talking about you don't say anything quickly.
I was done. And now you're wasting 30 minutes.
Nope.
Here, let me hand you a rack so you start crying.
For the movies.
Sorry.
It's okay. So for the movies, just a super believable world. Even though it's totally fantastical, it is so committed to itself that you can't help but be pulled into it.
Yes.
Like, it's just one of those worlds. I mean, take a look at Dungeons and Dragons, the movie.
So believable.
Not believable.
Really?
It's so...
I guess I'm a sucker.
Terrible. Don't get me wrong. I think it was an important movie to make because I think it paved the way for movies like Lord of the Rings. Yeah. But you don't need to watch that movie. I saw it in theaters. I was excited to see it in theaters.
So was I.
It was terrible.
And I knew it was going to be terrible, actually.
Jeremy Irons overacting the hell out of it. Like, really.
He was actually the best part of the movie.
He was the funniest part of the movie.
Yeah, well, which made it the best part because there was no real good parts in this.
No. And actually, I used to work in movies, and the lead actor in that, he used to play Jimmy Olsen in the Superman movie. His name's Justin something. I can't remember. He's a jerk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is a jerk. So I was not. I was satisfied the movie didn't do well because I don't think he really did a whole heck of a lot after that movie.
Well, yeah, and for my thought was it wasn't even really the cast. I mean,
no, because there was a few good actors in the movie.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was one of those things.
It was one of the worst scripts.
The script was horrible,
and again, they didn't. Here's the irony of it: they didn't commit enough. Even though Jeremy Irons, he was in it to win it.
On average, he couldn't even bring the commitment level up to enough.
Yeah. But in Lord of the Rings, you have so many people taking it so incredibly seriously.
Especially if you watch the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
You get how much effort they put into every piece of equipment.
Everything.
What the backdrop, it's like a good world builder. It's like, it's like, it's the stuff behind the stuff they're worried about as much. And maybe it doesn't get quite the budget as the other stuff, but they're worried about every detail in the world. And it really the love for the world and you felt like the world was so believable. I will give it to you like this. Did you see the Peter Jackson King Kong?
Yeah.
And when you saw the world of King Kong and all of the lava flowing, was your first thought, oh, they're in Mordor?
No, actually.
Yeah, no.
Did King Kong come after it? I thought it came before. Or
it was after the first one. It was before it was over.
Okay.
And when it came out, the first thing I thought was,
of Mordor?
Oh, King Kong lives in Mordor. And it was dark and lava everywhere.
I don't remember that.
And it didn't really look exactly the same, but it was close enough and it was humorous enough that, that was my thought.
I love that world. I love the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings world,
Yes.
which I state specifically that way, because not that I don't love the Tolkien world.
But it's the same world. The world is the same.
The world is the same. But what I'm saying is,
except there's no
the way the world feels in my mind from reading the books is different than the way it feels, the way Peter Jackson delivers it in the movies. And not that I don't love the Tolkien world, I do, but the Peter Jackson vision of the world was just so wonderful to play in. It's great.
His take on Tolkien's world.
Very cool. And actually, another, I'm totally tacking this one on. Shadows of Mordor. I don't know. Do you have that?
Yes.
Why do you say it that way? You didn't like it?
I'll put it to you this way. The idea of the game, it looks fabulous. My brain cannot remember that many controls, and so your issue is just infrastructure. I have trouble playing the game because it doesn't work well with the way I think.
Okay.
And I get annoyed, and I played it for 10 minutes, and the idea of it was really cool, but I got so annoyed playing it that I stopped.
Okay. If you like Tolkien and you like video games and you haven't played Shadows of Mordor, you owe it to yourself. It is an impeccable.
Some of the ideas are.
It's an impeccable video game.
And I think for different types, and I played very specific types of games, but if you like more action kind of games and you're good at those, some of the ideas, like the whole idea where you build up the rivalries with the orcs and stuff. Well, there were such good things there.
There's great storytelling. Yeah.
I just couldn't get to it.
Oh man, it's a randomized. They called it the Nemesis system, and it's almost a randomized story generator within the context of the action that will occur randomly throughout the game. Yeah. So basically, old school video games, you run into an enemy, you kill the enemy, and that's it. Within the Shadow of Mordor, every single individual enemy you come across has a unique name, a unique look, and they will become part of your story, because if you co-op the way your character is, like when you die, you are resurrected. You don't actually die. You basically take like kind of a timeout, and when you come, it's
which is much better.
Spiritual timeout basically, and you're brought back. You're basically like a wraith.
Yeah,
and so you come back. So if an enemy kills you, say Bob the Goblin killed you. When you come back to life, Bob the Goblin is still in that world, and you will come across him again. Not only that, it marks him on your map. You can go find Bob the Goblin. And if Bob killed you, he gains experience and gains more power. So he could potentially kill you a number of times. And that's how you end up creating a nemesis within the system.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's engrossing.
I do want to point out, too, if you're a fan of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings or the Lord of the Rings in any fashion, especially if you're going to play a video game, never fight a goblin named Bob. It's always the toughest goblin in the game.
I don't know if I did never come across a Bob the Goblin.
I'm a fiction writer. I lie.
How can I forget that line? It's not like I created that line, right. And yet you use it to such perfect emphasis. All right, so Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and I want to mention one more along the lines of that. If you're an MMO player, my wife and I for a couple of years played Lord of the Rings online, and they put a lot of love into building that world. And you really you went to Rivendell and you're like, oh, I'm in Rivendell, and you felt like you're in Rivendell, and that was one of the best parts of the game. And after a while, for me, most MMOs start feeling like work, and after a few years, you stop playing it because it's like, I have to log in and do work now that I'm home from work.
It doesn't feel like play
because
anymore.
You have commitments to other players and stuff like that. Like, we have to go on a raid now, or we're doing crafting night or whatever. And
crafting night.
You think I'm joking?
I know you're not joking, which is why I think it's funny.
But you need good stuff.
No, I get it. I do.
But especially, and I think it's free to play now. So if you like MMOs and you like Lord of the Rings and you haven't checked it out, at least check it out. Just to go into Bilbo's home and you're like, I'm in Bilbo's home.
You can actually go and be in Bag End.
Oh yeah.
It would seem a loss if they didn't allow you to do that.
It's the starting zone for hobbits. Would be Hobbit,
the Shire,
and the Shire.
Yeah,
and then you can cross the bridge and you go to Bree,
the Brandywine
River, and you actually, there's certain things where they do a lot of research on on the other short stories and stuff like that that was done by Tolkien, and they try and work in those parts of the world. And then they obviously have to add in to fill in gray areas on their own. But it feels consistent with the world. And it's a huge world.
See, that's what I love about Shadows of Mordor is I felt it feels real consistent with the world.
Yes, it's an extension of a great world. And yeah.
I've never played this one. Or is that a book?
That's a bunch of books.
Okay, go ahead.
And so there's the original Dragonlance, which was an expansion for D&D, which was actually I forget if it came before or after the books. Maybe at the same time. I don't remember because I was kind of young when it came out. Hugely influential to me. Actually, the first city I built was part of the Dragonlance world. Because I liked the world so much and I wanted to add to it because I felt limited by not having enough information. And as the world builder started to come out in Dragonlance. So
that was some of your first world building.
So some of my first world building was for the Dragonlance world.
I wasn't ready for a world. I built a city.
And the original trilogy was about essentially an adventuring party and, overcoming ultimate evil. However, there was actually a subsequent trilogy called, and I believe it's called The Time of the Twins.
Time of the Twins?
And it's about two characters from the original trilogy. They're twins,
shockingly, yeah.
And one of them is essentially, if you know D&D, he is the chaotic evil mage.
Does he have a name?
Rastlin.
That name sounds familiar.
He is one of the probably most famous D&D characters of all time.
Rastlin.
And he tried to become God.
Okay.
Because there's a series of gods, and he wanted to replace them out. And it's the story of his brother. And Rastlin did not start off chaotic evil, but he ended up that way at the end of the first trilogy through character development, which actually had character development. And his brother, who's essentially your probably chaotic good character, essentially trying to stop his brother, but not wanting to kill his brother, and probably not being powerful enough to kill his brother, who is such a powerful mage that he is literally at the point where he can start challenging gods.
Yeah, it's easy to gain power when you're the bad guy.
Yes, and definitely it's over the top stuff made for kids, but great reads. And I don't know if it holds up well as an adult or whatever, but it was done very well. One of my favorite, and it led me to many of my early years totally power gaming with mages.
You know what? I think I can get to this choice now. I think it fits well.
You feel
here. Okay. I kind of threw it up here.
No idea what it is.
I thought you read this. Okay.
Makes no.
I really thought you read this. So there is a great book by Eve Forward called Villains by Necessity. I discovered it in a bookshop in like the bargain bin. I think I literally paid $1 for the hardcover.
Now, was this one of those where you're like, oh, this is worth checking out, it's $1?
Exactly. Okay. And honestly, at the time, I wasn't reading. It was a time in my life where I think I might have come back from New York, and I hadn't been reading much.
Yeah.
Or it might have been before New York. But
for whatever reason,
I wasn't reading much. I picked it up, and it really got me back into reading. Yeah. The thing that's unique about Villains by Necessity, it is like your classic sort of Dungeons and Dragons tale where you have a party of adventurers set to a common task to save the world. Unlike any of these stories, they're all bad guys. Normally, it's a group of good guys. So when you have a group of good guys set to a common task, you have camaraderie.
Yeah.
You have cooperation. Sure, people might butt heads because they have a difference of opinion. When you have a group of villainous characters, it's a decidedly different adventure.
Group dynamic.
Yeah. So here's the basic gist of the story. You have an assassin who's the head of the Assassins Guild in his area, who is very good friends with the head of the Thieves Guild, which is uncommon for the assassins and the thieves to mingle together. But these two happen to become friends, and they would sometimes work with each other. And since they were both head of their respective guilds, no one could really break their stones about it. Well, what the overall backstory, and this is covered in the beginning of the book, is that there was a climactic battle between the forces of good and evil. And evil got its butt kicked. Good really trashed evil really bad. So there's a real powerful wizard, and what he decides to do is he creates a spell that allows them to whitewash an evil person or character to be good. So you've got lifelong mercenaries becoming farmers. Okay. You've got dark mages becoming healers.
So they're really eradicating evil from the world, but not like killing it and becoming
exactly. Okay. So there is a...
I think I have talked to people about this now that you're saying that, but I've actually not read this.
So there's a dark... there's the dark gate. This is a physical gate where evil springs forth from another place, and that is what brings evil into the world. They seal that up, and there are dark portals throughout the world. These are where evil can gain power from. They destroy them all. So now you have a surplus of good in the world, and you have so little evil in the world. And what's happening is, this guy who's the head of the Thieves Guild and this guy who's the head of the Assassins Guild, they're seeing all their friends. The people that are in their Assassin and Thieves Guild, as you can imagine, these are not nice people, but they're their family. And they're slowly leaving and vanishing. They're just not coming back to the guild. And eventually, they are the only ones left in their guild. So they do what anyone would decide to do at that point. They go get drunk. And while they're getting drunk, they realize that the world has become boring. There's something wrong. Yeah. Like, there's too many goody-goodies in the world. And they decide that what the world needs is more evil. There's something wrong with the world. The world needs some serious corrupting right now. So they set forth to... It's not like they were. So
it's almost like the unadventure. Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't quite set forth on this path on purpose. They got drunk. They got arrested. They try to escape. In the process of escaping, they run into a cleric who, not cleric, earthy, crunchy hippie.
Druid.
Thank you, druid. They run into I love that got it for you. They run into a druid and she's like, "Hey, whoa, stop. You're exactly what I'm looking for. The world needs to be more evil."
So this is really like DVD. The true neutral is trying to shift the balance of power to be...
So what she explains is in the climactic battle, there were druids on both sides of the war. She's like, you have to get that the world, if it becomes super evil, it'll explode in its own chaos. Mm-hmm. But if it becomes true good, it will implode in its own perfection and beauty. It can't be that way. There has to be a balance of power.
Either way the world is.
Yeah, okay. You have to have a good balance of good and evil within the world. So she's like, we need to make the world more evil. And they're like, we think you're nuts, but we like where you're talking. So they proceed to go about that, and they pick up characters along the way and whatever. But the thing is, because everyone they pick up along the way is a bad guy, they're constantly stealing each other's stuff. They're backstabbing each other. They lie to each other. Yeah. They have they all have their own agendas, and it's very funny. Like, it's a very comical book in that regard. It's not quite a comedy because it's definitely got some real serious parts too that are great, but it's such a great adventure. And it's it's a believable world. And I love the way it's written. If you can get your hands on it, you're going to pay because it's out of print. It's a favorited book. You can get it for like $30 on Amazon right now.
Wow.
If you want it brand new, paperback on Amazon, you're looking at over $100.
Wow.
I had 2 copies of the book. I can guarantee that anybody that you've spoken to in our friend circle about this book came upon it through me because I discovered it on my own. No one told me about it. I bought 2 copies. After I read that hardcover, I ran out and I bought a soft cover, and I started loaning the soft cover out to everyone I knew. And I held on to the hardcover, and it wasn't until a few years back that I was looking through my bookshelves. My hardcover's gone. Yeah. I have no idea what happened to it, and I'm very sad that I no longer have it.
Yeah.
I'd like to replace it. But the point is that just great fantasy. Like, I love that it was a take on the fantasy adventure story that I had never been exposed to.
And
before.
It's great because it took sort of the ideal D&D trope of fantasy, which is very common. And don't get me wrong, I call it tropes. I don't have a negative opinion of tropes like a lot of people do.
There's nothing wrong with tropes
for a reason because people like
they work.
But it flips it on its head where, oh, wow, this world's getting way too good. Let's go stop it.
Yeah. It's good stuff. A great characterization. Like, the characters are great.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go to my next one now. Well, I'll skip my next one because we talked about it, which is Lord of the Rings. And I want to go to one
a total different direction than what we've been talking about. Direction,
and a lot of times when you talk about fantasy, these kind of movies get forgotten because they're not your classic sword and sorcery types of stuff. Mm-hmm. But Dark Crystal.
I love the Dark Crystal.
It's probably one of my favorite Muppet properties of all time.
Mm-hmm. Mine too, definitely.
And
I don't like to. I do my best not to invite people into my bedroom, and that statement means share things that occur between my wife and I on an intimate emotional level. But
how does Muppets and your wife
allow me to explain?
Oh, okay.
There are many nights, and I did this very consistently for the first few years of our relationship, where we'd be curled up at night, we're ready to fall asleep, we're spooning, and my face is quite close to my wife's ear, and I say, I love you and good night. I love you very much, even though you don't like the Dark Crystal. And the reason for this is my wife never watched the Dark Crystal as a child. Mm-hmm. I tried to show it to her as an adult, and she couldn't get into it, despite the fact that she's a huge fan of The Labyrinth. Well, we're not going to get into The Labyrinth. I know how you feel about it, and it's going to take up too much time to get into it. But I love The Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
And
any sane person would.
Yeah, of course. Why my wife doesn't get how amazing that movie is, I don't know. I know I'm tangenting. You keep going, but I have a ton to add here.
And the thing I like about it are, one, Gelflings aside, the two main races of the were the way that they were connected, and it was like, and this kind of goes back to the usual good versus evil, and really the problem with the world were the two races were supposed to be one race, and so you had one that was really evil and one part that's really good, and neither one were great for the world, but they needed to remerge.
And they can't, and it's like one can't exist without the other.
Yes. And that part of it, it was sort of a unique races and really race on top of it, as you learn at the end that it's one race. And just that kind of interplay with it was really one of the things that made it stick out for me forever. And actually, the Gelflings were actually my least favorite part of it.
Oh, yeah.
But the world itself...
The Gelflings seemed less believable to me than the other two races.
Which the Skeksis and...
Skeksis.
And I can't remember what the...
I can't remember. It's actually I seem to remember it being a relatively real world, like the Elders. It might just be literally the Elders. I'd have to look it up. I know there's probably a couple of people listening to it.
It's not super important, but really they were one race that was split into two. And I've seen that sort of in other areas, or something similar to that, where... I think it was in Dragonlance. Their ogres were originally the most beautiful race in the world. And because of their corruption, and I think maybe they upset a god, their insides came out to the outside. And that's what makes ogres ugly. But originally, and there is a race, and I forget what they're called, and they're the original ogres, the ones that were actually good, are like more beautiful than elves, which is,
that's a big deal, yeah.
Sacrilege! Fiction, tough to believe, but
nothing's prettier than elves or Gelflings. The thing that about the Dark Crystal, though, this actually ties back into our prior episode about magic, is that you have the good guys, very shamanistic magic, and the Skeksis were,
science is magic.
Yeah, more science. I was going to say more science is magic. Yeah, and more. Maybe a little learneder magic. I'm sticking to it, man. I'm holding on to that. Okay. Learneder magic, yeah.
That's it. Go find and replace on my website now.
It just anytime it's learned, it's not learned, it's learneder. Like, you could even spell it differently just to throw people off. Like learneder.
It'll sound like even more clever.
Yeah. I like it.
I might go that way.
Yeah. Dark Crystal, I think, is something that, from experience with my wife, I think that everyone should expose their children to the Dark Crystal, because it seems an adult they don't get it. Or
Which is funny too, because when I watch it as an adult, to me, it hasn't lost anything, but I also have
It was scary as a child. I remember being scared.
It was dark. It was very dark.
Dark Crystal.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too shocking. But you know what? At the time, though, you're like, oh, let's take our kids to go watch this new Muppet movie. Skeksis. Or if you ever watched
Skeksis friend.
If you ever watched The Storyteller, which was a short-lived series,
I'm aware of that, but I don't know that I've ever actually watched it.
I have to go see if it's on Netflix.
I've heard it's excellent.
I don't know if Kristen's seen it either, and they were really sort of. It was a lot of taking actual mythology and using Muppets to play it out. And some of those episodes were really not for kids.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was good stuff. Yeah.
Storytellers.
I think it was called Storyteller.
And
it was sort of like your Masterpiece Theater, if you remember that from being a child, where they'd open up the book, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
But it was,
I may have seen something because I've had this conversation before.
With Nate, probably, because Nate was the person. I think it might have came out when I was overseas in the service, and Nate is the person who actually shared it with me originally. So
I'm going to have to look it up. Let's jump over to are we ready to tackle that yet? Or do you want to go here?
Let's hit both of those quick, because we've talked a little bit.
You want to talk about this one quickly?
No.
That's not a quick one.
No, I'm saying the two S ones. Yeah.
Okay, so
we talked about the first one.
I'll tell you what. I'm just going to footnote Suikoden.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of chalk that up to, you said Dragonlance, that this is a book series. There's also a video game Dragonlance, and I don't know if they're related. I don't think they are. They are related.
Yes, that was a Gold Box D&D stuff being converted over, but Dragonlance is all tied back into D&D. There's some video games from it.
Okay.
I don't think there was ever any movies from it.
Suikoden is one of my all-time favorite role-playing games. Up there with the other one I'm going to mention on the list here is Fantasy Star 1, 2, and 3. I didn't play any. After that, they're probably up to 7 or 12 by now. I have no idea.
And wasn't it PH, or was that a different one?
It is a PH, but I wrote it quickly.
Okay. Yeah.
So Fantasy Star 1, 2, and 3. And Suikoden are very similar in structure when it comes to a role-playing game, a fantasy game.
Yeah.
But thematically, they're very different. Suikoden actually gets into Japanese mythology or Chinese mythology. Like, I'm not sure which culture it takes
it's derived from. It's derived
really, from. I'll say it this way. It's derived from actual Asian mythology.
Yeah.
That talks about the 108 stars of destiny, and one of the cool things about the game is that there's 108 characters to collect throughout the game. Right. It's really
most of
great.
Which are playable.
Yeah, almost all of them are playable.
I think in the original one they were all playable. In the sequels, definitely not. In
the very first one, not everybody was playable because a couple of them were just meant to amend your castle.
Yeah. Okay. So they just aren't the first one.
You couldn't take everyone into your party when you first but they could show up in the army style battles.
Okay.
So there was that aspect of it.
So that was from the first game.
Fantasy Star was the very first turn-based role-playing game that I got into. And I remember we went to the JCPenney outlet or warehouse in Manchester when it still existed. And my mom had given us money to do school shopping, and my brother and I spent $25 of that on a video game. My mom was pissed.
Why?
Oh, she was so mad.
I don't get it.
And we were like, I think we were spending our own money, though, because I think if she had given us the money, then I think she was still mad. No. She would have said no, but I think it was our money, but she was mad that we weren't spending it on, like, clothing. Like, no.
Mom, this is a new video game.
She was not. Cool. She was not happy about it. But Fantasy Star was amazing. It was. Now, I look back on it, it's kind of what you'd expect out of a role-playing game from that era. It's like an early Final Fantasy or like.
And now, tell me if I'm wrong.
Sega Genesis?
Well, that wasn't the
question. Go ahead.
That was the first, maybe one of the first, at least the ones I know that was a turn-based role-playing game where. I don't think like Suikoden, I don't really consider those turn-based because it's like...
Well, yeah, they were. They were totally turn-based.
Well, they weren't in combat, but not outside. Was it always like that?
What do you mean? Like
in combat or? And then you would just walk around the world?
Yeah, you would just walk around the world. And there would be random encounters. But
why is this one for you on there as well, Suikoden? Then? What's the delta?
Well, the delta is the type of games they are and more structure than anything else. Story-wise, they were different. But just the fact that you have a party-based, turn-based role-playing game, of which there are many, I realize.
Yeah. Or there were.
I would say
not turn-based.
They're not really turn-based anymore, yeah. But it was one of the first. The reason it's on my list is because we're talking about our favorite fantasy fictions. Yeah. It was one of the first ones. It was the first
it always sticks in there for you.
It was the first one that got me into turn-based role-playing game because when I was younger, I was all about action games. Yeah. My brother was the one who played the more role-playing games, like
Dragon Warrior.
Yeah, like that. I was not into that. Like I was like, oh wait, this is numbers. Like this is complicated. This is different. No, I just want to blow stuff up. And I still kind of play games.
Because Suikoden was sort of at the end of that. It was sort of some of those were some of the best turn-based ones, but it was at the end of that reign.
I don't know that I would call that because Suikoden was on the PlayStation 1, and there was still a lot of PlayStation 2 games that were like that.
But Suikoden 2 came out on PlayStation 2. Suikoden 3.
Suikoden 2 was PlayStation 1. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, maybe. But Suikoden 3 was
3 was definitely 2 on PlayStation 2.
By the time 3 came out, there was no one was making those kind of games anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when did Final Fantasy start changing their turn-based? 6, 7?
7 was still turn-based. I think it was the last one.
Okay. Well, I mean, that definitely...
It was the one with Cloud.
Yeah.
I think that was the last turn-based one that they did.
Okay.
And that was PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I was thinking that was 2. You're totally right about that.
Well, it was funny because I was looking for it because I thought my wife would like that game. And there's one of the most emotional scenes for me. I'm a sucker for killing loved ones in there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And actually, if we're going to talk about that, obviously that's Suikoden should be on your list too because...
Suikoden, as once again, I wasn't thinking video games obviously when I was doing mine. But there's 2 of them on your list that definitely could be on mine. And we've just covered one of them. But Suikoden...
the thing that I loved about hearing your story about, because I heard it from a friend, again, a big number of our friends circle played Suikoden, and you collect 108 characters, and there is a character that dies that it's a very emotional death. Can I say what happened with you?
Yeah.
I'm aware that you cried when that happened.
No.
That's what I was told.
Okay.
I was told that you told someone else that, and you're not the only person I know that has done that.
I'm not saying I didn't tell someone I said that.
You're saying it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Okay.
Now, I was emotionally moved.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong.
So you deny the crying, and that's not just you trying to be manly. Like, you'd admit it if it did happen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Like, when my grandmother passed away, I cried like a baby.
Okay, well, that's different. We're talking about a video game, not an actual family member.
I only cry in war movies.
Horror movies?
War
movies. Yeah. Fair enough. There's a character that dies in Suikoden. It's very emotional. It's built up very well, and it's unavoidable. What I was told is that you get a choice when you defeat one of the enemy's generals throughout the game. I think there's 6, and you get the choice to have them join your army or execute them. And after one of the characters died in the game, I heard you killed every general from that point on.
And then
forward.
I was so mad when I figured out that if you could get all 108 stars, and I had to put the whole game over again because I wanted that character alive.
Yeah. What happens is if you can collect all 108 characters, and to do that, you have to recruit all the generals.
I think there's one that will die no matter what. Your father. Your father, you cannot recruit your father. No, you cannot recruit.
Well, then he's not. He was the first one. Then he's not one of the 108.
No, he's not.
Okay,
but he's I think the only general who's not.
Yeah.
But so of the great generals, all of them are except for him, and you get the option, but he will not accept.
Right. That's another thing that I didn't like about Suikoden is that they offer you the illusion of choice throughout the game.
None.
I don't think there's.
Well, I would say none.
There's 1 or 2 choices you can actually do, but there's a bunch of big choices that they offer you, but you can't actually make a choice. Like if you turn left, they make you go right. If you turn right, you turn to the right way.
Well, it's like when that character dies, I go back and restart the game because I don't want to lose the character.
Right.
And I go through and I try to make him not come.
Right. And you can't.
You can't stop.
It's not a choice because he has to come so he can die.
The part of the game is about the fate, and it's the destiny of the 108 stars. And so I could accept it, but I think more of it is
my thing is if you're going to build choice into the game, don't give me a choice where I don't have a choice.
Yes.
Give me a choice where I do have a choice.
Just have it play out as he says, I don't care what you think, I have to come.
Right. Yeah.
And don't make me keep pushing no.
Yeah.
Keep pushing no. And after 3 times going,
I guess I have to bring you along and watch you die again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but yeah. So
that did really annoy me. Did not cry during it.
Jim and I were replaying through it, and we were doing, because of course we both know what happens at that point in the game. And he's like, no, I want you to stay here. No, I want you to stay here. Don't come with me, because just hang out here. And it just forces himself
Jim
to
is one of the best people to do that kind of thing with.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah. He's so
his
fun
personality
about it.
works for that person perfectly.
I would love to have Jim on the show. His love for fantasy and for fiction would just lend to this so well.
Yes.
Are you ready to get to the big one?
Yeah, we'll just go there now. And I mean,
we're almost at an hour, so I figure we should do it.
We'll hit that one last. Actually, let me do that character first, because I'm getting ready to go see R.A. Salvador.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which is I did not realize must be from around New England somewhere. He's going to be at the Mark Twain House.
Well, explain to the listeners who he is if they're not familiar with his work.
He is probably one of the most prolific fantasy writers of our age, definitely, which is maybe of all time. I don't know that, but he's written several books, 17 of which have been on the New York Times bestseller list.
17,
which is more than most people have written books.
Yeah.
And he's written a lot more books, too, and I don't know about the quality of all of the books, but along the same time as the Dragonlance books were out, the Forgotten Realms books came out. And he created one of the best characters of all time, which I know the character very well, Drizzt. And he's a drow from Forgotten Realms. And if you've played the old Gold Box D&D games and you see this drow who's destroying half of the world with his sword.
I seem to remember him being on a bunch of covers, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They use the art for that.
That's the character that made drow.
Yeah,
I mean, and which
if you're not familiar, Drow is a specific race of dark elves in the D&D
and they're
world.
Evil, and they live underground, so they're opposite of in a way of wood elves.
Yeah.
But they're still really hot.
Yeah,
because they're elves, and you just can't help that in a D&D world.
I'm an elf, of course. I have long hair and beautiful skin.
Oh no, I'm a man. You shouldn't. Oh, I had no idea.
You're so pretty.
But that is one of the quintessential characters for a person who's written more books on the New York Times bestseller than most people have written. And I don't think most fantasy books make the New York Times bestseller list. So that
in and of itself is noteworthy. Yeah.
You know, I mean, every once in a while you'll get a series like Harry Potter that will do it, but he had multiple series, and so definitely. That character is one of the most influential characters in my background. So, and it covers several of his books. So, and I will be checking him out at the Mark Twain House, and hopefully this will come out before. I'm not sure what the date is right now, so I don't know what date it is.
The 23rd, I think.
I'll put a link up to it in the show notes, and I might do a prequel thing out for it if this episode airs after, because I forget when the actual. But
when the event is.
But if you're in the Hartford Springfield area, because like we said, it's really the same thing. Go to the Mark Twain House. If you like fantasy, this is one of the big writers.
Yeah, definitely.
And the home of one of America's biggest writers.
Yeah, I know. I think this is interesting. They're having it at the Mark Twain House. That's super cool. So why don't you intro this?
Okay.
Because now keep in mind the episode
is
fantasy. Favorite fictional fantasy.
And we both have works in here that we could put on this list, that we like better than some of these works, but we're not going to because it's fantasy. We're only putting fantasy on this. So I have to go with one I want to add, and I thought Mike was going to fight me. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm going to call you Michael for this one. Star Wars. Yeah. Star Wars is a fantasy. It's sword and sorcery. It's high fantasy with spaceships. It's in a sci-fi setting.
It's a space fantasy.
And if you don't believe us, you're wrong. Make sure to give Michael a tweet. Yes, make sure it's Michael.
No, tweet Jeffrey if you want to. Yeah, I don't need people to tweet me about it. You should have them tweet you about it.
Yeah, tweet me. I don't care.
That's fine.
I'll find this all the time because, yes, there are spaceships. Spaceships are not what makes science fiction.
Brief tangent. What makes science fiction? In your opinion?
It is the focus of science in the world. It's the celebration of science being good or bad. and its effects on the world. It's about the science. You don't need spaceships in science fiction at all.
I agree.
Just because you
agree
have
with
them
that
does not make it science fiction.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some movies out there.
And especially, let's be honest, even though they tried to work it back in the prequel trilogy, the Force is magic.
Yes.
They just call it the Force.
I do not like that midichlorian junk. Nobody does.
No one does.
It's never been mentioned again.
Rejected it.
Yeah, everyone rejected it.
And even Lucas did, because he realized everyone's like, no. You just can't go there now.
Yeah. You made space magic.
Yes, it's
space magic. Space magic.
You know, and
I'm sorry,
actually
dance magic.
Another one of my interviews was with Jeff. What a great name of an author, Morin, J.S. Morin, and he does space fantasy, and where it's like mages are in the engine room, and it's complete. It's not even trying to be
science fiction
at all. So don't think that just because you have spaceships, and don't worry about it, because you know the thing is, if you want a fantasy feel to it, it's the feeling of it. You know, is it the technology that's important? Is it how does the blaster work is important, or that's a laser or plasma? If that's not the important thing, it's maybe not science fiction. And it's maybe not even that important what people call it, but realize that if you're in the space genre, people like me who are geeky are probably going to have these kind of discussions about it.
Yeah. I see nothing wrong with putting fantasy in a spacefaring world.
And you know what's funny? In a science fiction episode, I probably wouldn't chastise people for saying Star Wars either. I would just
I think that you can argue both points with Star Wars. I think it's a unique property in that respect.
But I think especially because of the Force is magic. Magic.
Not everyone can use it.
Not everyone can use it.
Which, if everyone could use it, it'd probably fall more into science.
It would depend on why.
True.
Yeah, it could be like a supernatural. Everyone can do it, but whatever.
So, in discussing Star Wars as a fantasy, one of the things that immediately came to mind to me independently, I had written it on my list before you had mentioned that you wanted to talk Star Wars. I wrote down Knights of the Old Republic, which was a PC game, and they also made it for Xbox, and now they have an MMO called, I think it's just called The Old Republic. So not to be confused with The Old Republic, it's Knights of the Old Republic.
Ye Old Republic, is that what it was called?
Not Ye. Okay. Ye Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic is one of the early BioWare games, and if you ask me, it's the best. Here's how I'll phrase it so that I can be safe without somebody stabbing me, a fellow Star Wars fan stabbing me for sacrilege. It's my favorite Star Wars story, because as you play the game...
Cowardice?
How is that cowardice?
Because you had to preface it because you didn't want people to say bad things.
Well, I didn't want to say something that I didn't feel was accurate. I was going to say it's the best Star Wars story that I've been exposed to, which you could also say, okay, you're being cowardice. But the reason I state it that way is because there's a lot of the books that I haven't read. So
the terror in his eyes are unbelievable.
Shut up. That's not true. But my point is that there's a lot of great Star Wars stories out there that I haven't read. Yeah. So I don't want to make a comparison to the game to stories that I can't.
And it's like D&D. You can't read all the stories out there. And
there's a ton.
Maybe don't even want to. And that's maybe a good thing. But there's a lot of work.
Knights of the Old Republic is an amazing story. And it has a hook in the story. I mean, is it okay for me to spoil a game that's like at this point like 15 years old? Or
any other things that we spoiled today?
True. And I would think that most of our listeners would not go back to try to play this game at this point.
And then I'm going to spoil Game of Thrones. So
okay. You realize that that's a lot newer, and that people are still exposing themselves to Game of Thrones. All right. Well, the thing, and you've played through it, or you have not?
I have not played it.
Okay. And the Old Republic, which is the MMO, builds off of the story of the Knights of the Old Republic. So the thing about the Knights of the Old Republic is you choose in the beginning if you are you choose the kind of Jedi you are, or I don't know, you become a Jedi throughout the course of the game, and you choose whether or not this is one of the early games where you could actually choose whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. Throughout the entirety of the story, you are being exposed to this character in hindsight as a backstory of what's going on now, Revan. This character Revan, this Lord of the Sith Revan, he was a Jedi and then went to the dark side, and he was so rotten and so terrifying. And they talk about him throughout the entirety of the game. They build this character huge, and it's effective. Like, it's believable. Like, you're deep in the game and you're scared of the name because it brings such terror to all the other characters in the game. Like, this Revan guy, he was no joke. He was the real deal. He was like the worst, way scarier than Vader.
Wow.
Like, seriously, like, way scarier than Vader. And occasionally you see flashbacks of the character that actually show you the character. And like Vader, he's a masked Sith Lord. And the guy who kind of like killed him is now the big bad guy. I forget his name, but he's the big bad guy that you're after throughout the entirety of the game. And the thing that really sticks out for me about that character was visually, he had no jaw. Like, he had a mechanical jaw that covered from the bottom of his nose down. And when he would talk, it would shift a little. But there's a part in the game later where he removes it. Have you ever seen what a living person looks like without a jaw?
Yes.
It's very unsettling.
Yes.
It's incredibly unsettling. And obviously this wasn't a living person, but it was a facsimile.
Good enough.
Yeah, of a living person. It was creepy.
Yeah.
So you get towards the end of the game, and what you find out is that you are Revan. He tried to kill you.
Now, were you really shocked in that?
I was totally shocked. Okay, well, like, it was like Fight Club.
It did pull it off, though.
It pulled it off very successfully. I had no idea. And a lot of people that I knew that played the game had the same experience where they were like, it was like Fight Club. You got to the end and you had no clue that it was you all along. But it explained some conversations that came along the way, because what they did is basically they almost made the Jedi bad guys. Because what they did is they brainwashed, they basically wiped the slate clean on this person, Revan. He was betrayed by his apprentice. The Jedi got him while he was still alive. Because before he went to the Sith, he was an incredibly powerful good guy. He was a huge force for good until he went to the dark side. So they said, let's whitewash him like villains by necessity. Let's erase his memory and see if he'll choose to be good again. So your choosing throughout the game is actually you re-choosing and you rebuilding Revan as a character.
Okay. So here's my question with that. So at the end, once you figure that out, it's not at that point you're choosing to go dark side or good side.
You still have options, actually.
You still have options. For the most part, you've built a long way on one of those two paths at this point. Okay.
Yeah, but you can... Like,
still
there's still options towards the end. As a matter of fact, there's this big climactic. Of course, there's a big climactic fight at the end of the Star Wars story. Yeah. And you kind of like choose during that fight, like what's going to happen. You're going to go good guy or bad guy, and how the relationships. There's a lot of great. I mean, it's a BioWare game. I shouldn't need to say much more about that, but. The thing that makes it unfair to compare Knights of the Old Republic to any of the movies is the movies are 2.5 hours long. Knights of the Old Republic is 54 hours long.
Yeah, and that's an interactive medium.
They've got so much more time to build the characters, to build the story.
So you feel ownership in it.
Exactly.
And that's one of the strengths of interactive media over other forms. But all right, though, I think it's this time. I'm feeling I feel I need to tell people what to do now.
Well, then why don't you tell people what the World Builder's Task of the Day is?
The World Builder's Task of the Day, the World Builder's Task of the Day is to sort of right now, and don't spend more than 5 minutes doing this, write down a list of your favorite fantasy fiction. And if you can still consume it, do it. Go back, read an old book you like, and maybe you'll go, well, it was great back then, but it doesn't hold up over time. But just revisit something that helped give you the influences that you use in your own way now to continue your fiction. Just go back and have an historical moment with something you love.
And what I'm also going to suggest as part of the task is identify, but also further identify within that fiction why it works so well and why it rings for you. Yes. And maybe there's something there that you can put into your own fiction. I mean, obviously, all we're doing is recycling. You know, we're finding themes and characters and storylines that we love from other stuff, and we're building it into our own stuff.
That's right. You're turning it into your own.
Don't plagiarize.
There's a difference.
Make it your own.
That's right.
How about you want to keep telling people what to do?
Yeah.
Okay. So what about a real world task?
No, I'm getting cheap again.
You were going to try to use the same one you used.
No, I was going to say mow my lawn.
Mow my lawn. And bring your Pip-Boy over with you.
Bring over your Pip-Boy, give it to me, and go mow my lawn. No, that's just not
that's a little bit much.
No, do some research on some real stories. BS stories, but real ones.
What do you mean? Like mythology. Yeah.
You know, and you might be familiar with one, like maybe you might be familiar with, like, say, Greek mythology or Norse mythology. Don't look at those. You know, go to Africa, go to Central America, South America, someplace where you're less familiar. Maybe you know them all, in which case pick one that you're the least familiar with. But pick out a mythology and just read some of the stories.
I'm gonna encourage Chinese mythology. Chinese mythology is fascinating.
It is, but they all are. And they're all delivered in different ways, and you have to understand this. And then there's less information about some of the. We know a lot about Chinese mythology, so you can get a lot out of that. But pick one that you have the least amount of information with, and then when you read some of the stories, look at the culture and see, wait, are there some themes from those mythology stories that I could see in the culture? Because you know what you're going to find? That's where the beliefs start to bleed through in the people. So that is your real world task for the day.
Do you have a tease for the following episode?
I sure don't.
You sure don't. Do you want to take a second and consider what the next episode could be?
Games. We're going to talk about games, not video games, not...
Oh, you're really shortchanging me here.
Nothing Mike has ever played. Maybe. We're going to look at history.
You're going to have a hard time finding games that I haven't played.
I bet you I could find over 500 really quickly.
I'm sure you could, but what are you going to do? You're going to tap into a well that I have no potential exposure to?
Yes.
Oh, that's not fair.
We're going to talk about ancient games.
I knew you were going to go there.
And we're going to talk about...
game development, like the initial games.
Yes, where games came from and why they existed and how they affect the culture. They're an extension of the culture and they affect the culture. Why do we play games?
So gaming history.
Yeah.
Gaming development, the history of gaming development.
Yes, but really old.
Really old.
And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.